Good morning, everyone. We have Matt Grisham here today to talk about workflows in Dynamics AX 2012. So thank you for jumping on, and I'll let Matt take it away.
All right, thank you. All right, let's get started. All right, today we're going to cover just some basic workflow concepts. And then we're going to do a review of the functional setup of workflows, and then we're going to take a quick look at the technical components of workflows. So workflows. A basic definition of a workflow is just a business process that defines how a document flows through the system or through AX. By using workflows, it helps promote consistency in your processes, which helps you keep to any standards or rules or regulations that you might need to enforce with your business processes. Also, workflows in AX 2012, if you worked with them in 2009, in 2012 they've been greatly improved. Now you have features like advanced flow controls, you have a graphical editor, and you can also break out workflows based on different line items. And so right here I have an example of what could possibly be an expense report workflow for your business, which is the document that we're dealing with. So in this example, you submit an expense report, it gets reviewed to make sure that the receipts are attached to the expense report, and then based on a dollar amount there's an approval process that you go through, and then once all that's completed, the workflow is completed and the expense report is either approved or rejected based on the approvals from the different users. And I apologize for that text being really small, but I promise that's what it says. So some general features of the workflows in 2012. Like I mentioned before, you have advanced flow controls, which can be conditional and manual decisions. So a conditional decision can branch out the workflow to different approval steps based on a condition such as a dollar amount or maybe a country or other criteria. And then manual decision is just a decision sent to a user, and they have to decide which path the workflow is going to take. Another addition to 2012 is the capability to do parallel activities. So you can have multiple activities going on at the same theoretical time in the workflow, the same step in the workflow. You also have line level workflows, which means if you have a document that has multiple lines on it, you can break out those lines to follow different workflows. So you have a user that, continuing with the expense report example, if you have a user that submits an expense report that has multiple line items that may be applied to different projects, and those different project items need to be reviewed by different project managers, you can separate out those line items to be sent to the different PMs for approval. The work item queue is a new feature in 2012. That allows you to create a queue of work items from workflows that can then be assigned to entire groups of people instead of just an individual. So, if you're trying to delegate duties to a whole group of people instead of just an individual, it improves efficiency because you don't have to change the assignment every time you have an employee leave or a new employee join. You can just add them to a role, and they're automatically part of the workflow approval or decision process. And then you've also got automated tasks you can use with AX, which is pretty self-defined. It's a task that can automatically apply some business logic to a workflow without any interaction from the users. Here's a basic layout of the new workflow editor. We'll get into the real thing here in a minute, but I just wanted to define the different areas that I'm going to be talking about. Across the top you have the action pane. On the left you've got the workflow elements, which is kind of like a palette of tools that you can use, and you drag those onto the canvas where you actually construct your workflow using the graphical editor. You've also got a navigation bar, and you can also open up the errors pane to look at any errors that you might have in your workflow. Okay, so let's get into our basic demo now. We'll kind of pseudo create a workflow. I'll show you the steps and then we'll actually open a one that's already been created. Workflows are set up in any module that supports workflow, with the exception of the organization administration is located at a little different place, but typically it's in the setup area and it's just called your module's name and workflows. From there you create a new one, and you select the type, which is basically a template, and then you define a name, an owner, email template, user instructions, some conditions and notifications, and this makes more sense when I show you, so we'll do that. So I'm going to show you kind of an example of an expense report workflow. So if I go into AX, this is AX 2012, go to the travel and expense module, you'll see under setup that I have a menu item for the travel and expense workflows. This is going to open up a list of all the workflows already set up in the module, and then if I want to create a new one, pretty easy, just click new. It's going to ask me which kind of type of workflow I want, which, like I said, these are basically templates which kind of define what kind of elements are available to be used in the workflow. And when we get to the technical side, this will make a little more sense. So I'm going to choose the expense line item type and select create workflow. And then it's going to open the workflow editor for me. So here you can see I have my action pane, my elements, my navigation bar, my canvas, and then if I turned on the air pane, it would be down at the bottom. But my screen is small, and I don't want to look at it, so tell it not to show me that. You'll see that from the start you've got a start node and an end node on your canvas. Those are default nodes in your workflow because it's got to have a start and an end. It's kind of just a no-brainer. And then I need to set some basic properties for my workflow. So when I have my workflow selected, you can see that it's yellow. If I were to select an individual node, it would turn yellow if it was not the start node. If it was another element, it would. So to select my workflow, I can click on Basic Settings. It's going to ask me to give it a name, an owner. An owner is just the person who can maintain and modify the workflow. If I have an email template set up, I can choose that template to have it use a template for it uses to send emails from the workflow. Then it can also define some instructions for the workflow, and I can also insert placeholders, which basically take information from the workflow and put it into my instructions. So if I wanted to reference the actual expense report number in here, I could find it from this list and insert that placeholder. Or if I wanted to put the amount for the expense report, I could put it in as well. You can also elect to have some activation conditions. So maybe if you wanted to specify this workflow is only for expense reports of a certain dollar amount, you can select to set conditions for running the workflow and add a condition. So you can specify which field you want to look at, a comparison. Either you compare it to an actual value that you define yourself, or compare it to another field and work that way. You can also test these conditions using the test buttons where you add your conditions and then you can select an example of an expense report and then test it to see if the way you have your conditions set up work the way that you intend them to. On the notifications tab, you can select when notifications should be sent to users. So if you want to be notified as the owner of the workflow, just every time this workflow is completed, you can select that. And then you can also add any notes that you need. So that's the basic, just creating the workflow. We'll move on and add an approval element to our workflow. Here we'll set the name of the step, we'll add some instructions, we'll assign it to a user, we can add some conditions, and we can also use an escalation policy. So back in my workflow editor, to add the approval element, all I have to do is select the element from the toolbox and drag it onto the canvas, and then I can connect from the start node to my approval, just saying it's the first start or the first step. Then to actually change the settings of this approval, I double click on the approval process or the approval element. It will go down into the element itself and then show the actual steps of this element. And you can see my navigation bar has gone from the workflow, and then it shows that we're down into the approved expense lines item. So if I select step 1 and click basic settings, I can define the name of this step. I can give the work item a subject, so that it has a subject when it shows up in a work item queue, and also define instructions, and you have your placeholder options from before. On the assignment tab, you can select to assign it to a participant, which is just a user within a role. You can assign it to an entire organizational hierarchy. You can select a workflow user, which then gives you the option of the workflow originator. So the person who submitted the expense report, maybe you have to send it back to them to get something else. The work item owner, the workflow owner. Or you can assign it to a specific user, which then gives you the list of users that you can then select and then add to the list of approvers. You can also assign the step a time limit. So if using the time limit allows you to, if the time limit is exceeded, some automatic actions can occur. Maybe it's automatically rejected. Or you can set up an escalation policy so that if the assigned approver doesn't act on the workflow item within the time limit, maybe their boss is given the work item and then they have to approve, and they probably go have a talk to that approver why they're not getting their work done. And you can also set the days available. So, obviously if you were to set it to just one day and you didn't have this option to select which days you're working, if someone submitted one on Friday afternoon and then Sunday morning, the escalation policy is going to get followed because it exceeded the 1 day limit. So you can, if you don't work on weekends, you can deselect Saturday and Sunday, and then you don't have to worry about that issue of always escalating work items on the weekend. You also can choose the completion policy for the approval. These are pretty self-defined. A single approver just needs one person from the user list to approve the step. A majority is just 51% or over. If you select percentage, maybe you need 2/3 of the approvers, you can set that percentage here. Or if you need a unanimous decision, you can select all approvers. You can also set conditions on these steps. So you can either elect to always run the step, or you can add a condition. So maybe if Sally can approve expense reports as long as they're less than $1,000, but if they're over $1,000 and it needs to go to Jane, you can set that condition here. Or maybe it needs congruent approval from both of them. You can always set one step to run, and then if another condition is met, it can run that additional step. And this condition setup is the same as before when we saw when to run the workflow. The escalation policy, you can use an escalation path, working with a time limit, as I was talking before. By default, you're always going to have at least one action to run when the time limit is exceeded, and then you can add multiple steps to your path, and then you can assign it to a hierarchy of users or a workflow user or an individual user, kind of like the approval assignment work. And then you can set different time limits on those different steps in your escalation path, and you can control the order by using the up and down buttons. So once you've configured your approval the way you like it, you can go back to your workflow using the navigation bar. You can add additional elements, conditional decision, you connect that, and then if it's true or false, you can move into different branches. Then at the end, you would connect all your elements so that they run from the start to finish. You can check your errors. I haven't done like any work in setting this up, so it's just going to give me a bunch of errors right now. But when you complete your workflow, you can look at these errors, work through them, double click these error messages, and it'll open up where that error is occurring so that you can fix your problems. You click save and close. You can add some notes here. Even if you're not done, you can save it. It just won't let you activate it. You can click OK. It will think about it a minute, and then it'll show up in the list, and it'll show that, hey, there's some errors with this, it's not complete, you probably need to fix some stuff, and it shows there's no active version. So if we look at this workflow, it's got a couple active versions, and it's over here. It shows all the records of the different versions that have been approved and when they were approved. If I click more, I can get more detailed information about what was done from version to version, and you can inactivate versions or make older versions active again. And that's, for the functional side, that's pretty much the best mile-high view I can give of workflows. So now we'll kind of move into the different technical components that are used when building these workflows. So we'll highlight categories, types, approvals, and the event handlers. Go back into AX, and this time I need to go into my development space and into the AOT. And now that in 2012 there's an entire AOT node dedicated to workflows. Which if you expand, you'll see you have your categories, approvals, tasks, types. The workflow categories is the first thing you need to set up. This defines basically which module workflows can be used. So you'll see that we have our expense management category, and it activates the expense module. Your types are your templates. So if I were to look at the travel line item template, which is that expense line item workflow template type that we were looking at earlier, you can see that under its supported elements it has this one approval, and that's why in our workflow editor we only had that one type of approval available. You always had the advanced flow controls, but which type of approvals you have depends on how your workflow types are set up. And the types are set up by basically right-clicking the node, going to add-ins, and you have a workflow type editor. To add an approval to a type, obviously you have to set up the approval in the approvals node. So we had, it's called travel expense line approval. There's our approval that we have set up. And these approvals are created in the same process of where you have the approval wizard to work through, where you assign what types of documents it's related to. When you create a workflow type, it creates a class in the AOT, which is basically the workflow type's name plus the words event handler. The event handler defines some business logic that can take place when different events occur in your workflow. So when I open up the event handler for this line item, you can see that it has different methods for when the workflow is completed or canceled, returned or started. And here you can add X++ logic into your workflow to maybe automate some events when events are reached in your workflow, which gives you a little more power if you are more technically inclined when creating your workflows. And I don't want to delve too deep into that because then we could be here for a week just working on that kind of stuff, talking about that kind of stuff. And that pretty much concludes our webinar today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email info@ibis.com. Thanks for your time. Have a good day.